Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm JC Tops. This week, we're taking a look at caviar. Once only considered for the elite, food enthusiasts from all backgrounds are now enjoying the delicacy. As a result of its growing popularity, the United States has emerged as a major player in the world of caviar, specifically Northern California. Writer-at-large and spirits reviewer Newman sat down with Ali Bolourchi to discuss the rise of caviar throughout the U.S. Ali Bolourchi is the owner of Tsar Nicoulai, a sturgeon ranch in Wilton, California, right outside of Sacramento. Sacramento County produces most of the caviar made in the United States. So listen on as Ali explains what makes a great caviar, why caviar is so expensive, the parallels between California caviar and California wine, and why Northern California caviar can rival its imported counterparts. Every glass of wine tells a story. These stories reveal hidden histories, flavors, and passions, and sometimes they unravel our darkest desires. In Wine Enthusiast's newest podcast, Vinfamous, journalist Ashley Smith dissects the underbelly of the wine world. We hear from the people who know what it means when the products of love and care become the source of greed, arson, and even murder. Each episode takes listeners into the mysterious and historic world of winemaking and the crimes that have since become Vinfamous. This podcast pairs well with wine lovers, history nerds, and crime junkies alike. So, grab a glass of your favorite wine and follow the podcast to join us as we delve into the twists and turns behind the all-time most shocking wine crimes. Follow Vinfamous on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and be sure to follow the show so you never miss a scandal. New episodes drop every other Wednesday.
What is it about caviar? We all love it, whether to pair with champagne or, my personal favorite, icy cold martinis. Maybe you've done a caviar bump or had it spooned on top of Prudo or blinis or even tater tots. Caviar is everywhere these days. But here's the thing. As demand for caviar has soared, many Americans are looking to local producers of fish roe and seeking sustainable options. So in the middle of all that, Northern California has become the epicenter of U.S. caviar. I'm Newman, writer-at-large and spirits reviewer for Wine Enthusiast magazine. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Ali Bolourchi, president of Tsar Nicoulai, one of the top producers of American caviar based in Sacramento, and an alumni of UC Davis. He's incredibly knowledgeable about aquaculture and the history of caviar, and I interviewed him for a story about California caviar that will appear in the magazine's upcoming California issue. And I knew right away that we had to have him on the podcast. So here we go. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you, Kara. That was a very nice introduction on your part. Greatly appreciated. And hopefully, we have some really fun, foodie, creative bites to share with your audience here.
So let's start with the name of your company, Tsar Nicoulai. I mean, what's the origin? It must be really challenging to have a Russian-sounding company name these days.
It's an interesting question. So you have, one of the 5 oldest farms in the world, located in Wilton, California, by a brand founded in San Francisco, California, back in 1979, and established the farming practice in 1984. And it has a kind of Caspian Russian-sounding name. So how the heck did we get to Tsar Nicoulai as our beloved brand of California-inspired white sturgeon caviar? The original founders of Tsar Nicoulai were the Engstrom family, and Mats and Daphne Engstroms, as some of the pioneers of sturgeon farming, historically speaking, had a beloved foodie grandfather named Nicholas. And, back in late 70s, early 80s, no one really knew of the United States, specifically the western portion of the United States, for having any sort of caviar significance. So as California sort of began this push towards a black gold rush of sorts with caviar, they wanted to kind of qualify the farmed production of Northern California as a worldly caviar, something that sort of met the expectation of the consumer, the aficionado, the enthusiast, who at that time really the Caspian Sea and Black Sea were the Mother Nature's homes of amazing caviar. So the name Tsar Nicoulai actually became a sort of Shah Tsar imperial way of describing their late grandfather. And so they took Nicholas, and instead of naming it Nicholas Caviar, they kind of looked up and found, hey, there was a Tsar Nikolai, and maybe we'll do that as an homage to our grandfather. So that's really the genesis of the name. And, while it's definitely had some both ups and downs in terms of its association, I would say presently, or at least in the past like 18 months, I think overall there's a lot of good that came from the name. Really, what it did was allow the domestic caviar enthusiasts to know that there's something grown under California sunshine that is every bit the quality that would be served to a czar or a shah. So that's really how Tsar Nikolai's caviar brand sort of came to life.
Okay, and I certainly don't want to focus on, the ugly part of the business, but I did read that you've been the subject of some anti-Russian sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely. About let's say at our cafe more so, we have a wonderful award-winning cafe in San Francisco's Ferry Plaza, which is a beautiful producers area. For anybody who visits San Francisco, I highly encourage you to go check out the Ferry Plaza and smell and taste and enjoy a lot of amazing crafted food items that are very local. Hyper local really is the goal there. I think at our cafe about a year ago, it was a little bit tough on the staff. They had a lot of questions to answer. We had flags out that we're supporting Ukraine. I think as a brand, what we did is we partnered with restaurants and chefs to try to do our part ultimately, not only to educate people on, the what we do in our association, or in this case, lack thereof, any sort of actual connection to Russia for us as a brand or ownership, but to help our staff feel comfortable. We tried to go out of our way to create charitable givebacks for the country of Ukraine through Red Cross and through a lot of these collaborative fundraisers with chefs where we were donating our California-inspired caviar to kind of get the word out that, hey, while our name may sound Russian, there really is no Russianness to Tsar Nikolai out sort of its historical sort of reference to quality caviar. So I think our staff in the last 6 months, 9 months, is definitely the dust has settled. I think a little bit further education has helped, our staff not feel as intimidated by the fact that, oh, shoot, we have a Russian sounding name and there's a war going on right now between Russia and Ukraine, where, clearly from a California company standpoint, our hearts are definitely with the people of Ukraine and everything they're going through. So, I would say, thankfully, as I kind of alluded to, things have sort of evened out. Most people are okay with the concept behind our name. And I think in the long run, again, it's just a representation of, our own sort of unique spelling of a kind of foodie homage to the founder's grandfather that, definitely has a Russian association to it in terms of Tsar Nikolai was a Russian czar, but really just kind of, branding it as our logo proudly shows that golden California state at the center of our logo. Almost a fusion of Caspian traditions, just with, modern California sort of food integrity inspired caviar.
So bringing this back to California, why is so much caviar coming from California these days of all places?
That's a pretty good question. And what I would say is that California, ironically, was one of the test places for sturgeon farming. And Northern California in particular, Sacramento County, is a great agricultural area. I'm going to pub my alma mater again. One of the best ag universities in the world, UC Davis, is about 20, 30 minutes away from where a lot of the sturgeon farming magic sort of came to fruition. So this is a very slow food. Part of the expense of caviar is it takes, this is a long cycled fish. It takes about 6 to 8 years to go from, spawning all the way up to a caviar producing female. So California has been around doing this longer than just about anybody else. And as the domestic enthusiast, the American with a palate for caviar has kind of began to realize, like, hey, why don't we take a look and see if there's some amazing caviars being farmed domestically? California has kind of been waiting for this, confluence of factors to come together. So, to answer your question, California tends to produce almost 90% of the caviar that is produced in the United States. So,
90%, that's a lot.
yeah, and again, this is a little bit of an estimate. So the real numbers could probably range anywhere from 75 to 90%. But really, and I'll take that a step further. Northern California would be where all of that is done. Sacramento County, really, there's some other states, Idaho's and Florida's and Carolinas, that produce caviar, but not at the same volume as California. And one of the reasons why California does really well is we're farming an indigenous fish. So the white sturgeon, that's our beloved native sturgeon, does really well when farmed in its home. And while Idaho, for example, also farms a species of white sturgeon that's the same as the one in California, just adapted over time through some migrations, it doesn't produce as much genuine caviar as the fish in California. Neither do the farms in the East Coast. And a lot of that just happens to do with really a replica of what you would see in the rivers and deltas and bays here. Very similar sort of water qualities and temperatures and microclimates and environments are done at the farming level. So, a little bit of ag tech and a lot of TLC. Northern California produces, some of the largest yield per fish, meaning the percentage of the sturgeon that actually is made into caviar is greater in Northern California than in other regions, whether there are countries or states that also produce this similar white sturgeon fish. So why so much caviar coming from California currently? Well, California's kind of got that perfect agriculture, aquaculture DNA to it. And, I know that we're doing this on, Wine Enthusiast podcast. Again, it's all about terroir. We have great soils, we have great waters, and we have a very inspired varietal of sturgeon. And by treating it respectfully and kind of adding in some components of sustainability, it allows us to grow our volume and our biomass from a farming perspective, whether it's our farm or some of the neighboring farms, without really losing our low density approach. There are some very creative ways that are kind of embedded in that California terroir that allows us to be able to produce more and more, but maintain quality along the way. So I think the analogy I would make is Northern California is a tremendous area for amazing, inspired, high-end agricultural food items. And whether it's wines or caviars, I think caviar is a little bit later to the party, but the California sort of amazing ag food production state really benefits the California farms. That's probably why caviar from California, you're seeing it on more menus and it's kind of becoming more relevant. There's two key factors. Again, great terroir, great ag, great tech, and most importantly, a delicious food item that just happens to be kind of local to us. And now hopefully it's becoming a little bit more heralded. And, as people become more educated and try it more and realize it is every bit as delicious as imported caviars. But as you said, it's local, has a lower carbon footprint, again, low densities, antibiotic-free, steroid-free environments, using no land-based proteins in our feeds, feeding the fish what they would have in the wild. Certain practices also help California do better work, but really a lot of it has to do with the amazing state and the amazing agriculture terroir that we have. So that's why you're seeing it more and more and more. We have the foundation and the bones to do even greater work. So slowly, as the caviar enthusiast gets inspired and realizes and kind of finds that hidden treasure, which is California-inspired white sturgeon caviar, we anticipate that growth to continue. Again, goes back to the boom of Napa and Alexander Valley. Really is amazing terroir, especially right now. We've had an unbelievable rain season in California in 2023. That's a long-winded way of saying go California. The reason our caviar is getting on more menus is we have an amazing state with really talented people and amazing, amazing geography. So,
By the way, I see that as our future magazine, Caviar Enthusiast. Why not?
I'm with you. That would be our hope. That would be our hope. We're just about a couple decades away.
I like what you say about different varietals of sturgeon. How many different types of sturgeon are there?
So there's about 26, 27 species of sturgeon, and they are of many differing lengths and colorations. And there's really just two branches of the sturgeon family without getting overly technical. There's kind of the Ossipenser side and the Huso side. And those two branches will come to the family, which is called Ossipenseridae, and that houses all these 27 varietals of sturgeon, which are northern hemisphere fish that, traditionally, from a caviar perspective, were Caspian Sea delicacies, and they had common names like belugas, ocetras, sevrugas. Now, in the United States, our team of scientists are really sort of observational scientists. We call a white sturgeon because it has, triangular scutes on its side that are white. We call the green sturgeon a green sturgeon because it has some green colorations. We call the lake sturgeon a lake sturgeon because it lives in lakes. So we don't have as much sort of charismatic names as some of these historical sturgeon that you would find in the Caspian or Black Sea. But again, it goes back to our, coastal Pacific white sturgeon really being that hidden gem that was kind of in our backyard and was kind of a test done by the University of California, Davis to see if this varietal was able to produce award-winning caviar, as ecologically it made sense to farm a native species because you wouldn't impact the wild population. Further, you'd be able to sort of test this varietal in a closed-loop farm where you weren't worried about a farmed version of that fish getting out and adjusting the DNA of the wild population. So you're able to do stuff that, the Monterey Bay Aquarium would deem as a best choice or a green practice. And really, if we fast forward from, the test in, the early 80s when we started in 84 till now, I mean, there's been, a good 40-year run in sort of mastering this craft of growing this varietal into a heralded product. So there's, I guess, a good and a bad to that. The challenge of it, again, I'm going to jump into a sort of wine conversation, is historically the Caspian caviars really have these specific varietals that people were familiar with. So while we may have like a Cabernet Sauvignon that we grow here in California, or white sturgeon, because it's very sort of buttery and intense in a good way in terms of that rich fat flavor. It is a full-bodied caviar. It took a lot of people to realize that, good caviar could be grown here. And it's, been a 40-year battle to get to that point, because the Caspian caviars were very much like, a Bordeaux red. They just carried so much historical relevance that it was very hard, even if, we felt we may have had a superior varietal, to tell people that were enthusiasts of these Caspian ocetras or belugas or sevrugas, that there was a different varietal grown in California that was every bit as awesome, more local, and grown under ideal California conditions with, the best possible feeds, healthier for you, more dynamic in flavor, and, lower carbon footprint to produce for the domestic enthusiast. So there are so many varietals now today that, I think it's the hope that with podcasts like this, educations for the consumer, that they can begin to nerd out on which varietal that they like, because that's really the key to wine's growth. Is the better you understand the flavors you like, you can identify them to the specific type of grape or production method that you like, or a region that tends to produce those better, and really hone in on delivering the food experience that you like. And that's really, as we, and I know I'm getting all over the place on these varietals, it's really the goal for California is to get the flavor out to more enthusiasts, because they're able to then benchmark that rich, fatty, almost foie gras of the sea flavor, and know that that's the kiss of Northern California caviar.
And now a word from our sponsor. I love shopping at Total Wine, as there is always something new for me to try. And even better, I know I'll always get it for the lowest price. Like the other day, I was looking for a Kentucky bourbon as a gift for Dad, but I found a Prosecco for under $8 and a French Rosé for under $7. With those low prices, I had to get both. I can't wait to see what I find during my next visit to Total Wine. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, always find what you love and love what you find at Total Wine and More. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. Be 21.
One of the things you said that really resonated with me when we talked for the magazine, I think you compared California's caviar to California sparkling wine compared to the champagne or Prosecco of another region.
Absolutely. Our best comparison is always side by side, because it just goes into my mom had spent some time in France and is a huge fan of Ruinart champagne. We have a partner winery that we work with in Northern California for our tasting experience, Domaine Carneros. And I have converted her to Le Rêve as her new favorite. But it's a California sparkling, right? So it's a champagne style, just made in Northern California. So I think it's one of those where, our hope is the more people try it, the more they begin to understand that there's more into it than just the name. So, just because a caviar is called Osetra or is called a Sevruga or is a Beluga hybrid or something that sort of brings with it that historical champagne Prosecco traditional approach to that delicious food bite, we're working on that. And we're working on it by, in our case, our namesake was our estate grade of white sturgeon. And that really was our way of, even in the inception of Tsar Nicoulai's branding, they would refer to it as California Osetra style estate, so that people knew that this varietal of California white sturgeon was of, to make the comparison, champagne quality, even though it was a California sparkling. So I think that's where we see the growth happening is food education. And food education is more accessible. And the average age of very knowledgeable foodies is getting younger and younger. And a lot of that benefits, the work we do in Northern California. Because without an educated consumer, you're really kind of always going to be at the mercy of, fancy marketing and, historical name relevance. Because two things have to happen in order for the product to stand out and show out, as we say. It has to be delicious. And then if you can help people get educated enough to try it, you'll find that perfect marriage of they'll be inspired to seek you out. And then they'll let people they know, hey, next time you're looking for caviar, you don't have to bring it in from Europe or Asia or Latin America. Give one of the Northern California farms a try. And that's really our hope through some of our partnerships, specifically with like Whole Foods Market. We were fortunate enough to win an environmental stewardship award back in, I believe, 2019 or 18 with Whole Foods. That really helped a broader audience kind of get a sense of the practices done at the farms in Northern California to say, hey, well, these farms are working to be beyond a current standard of green, whether it's through recirculating aquaculture systems, new RAS systems, or aquaponics to further filter the farms and create tangible resources from these waste streams. But ultimately, that gets them to the point of trying it. They enjoy it. And then it becomes like even the biggest champagne enthusiast, which I'll, give a shout out to my beloved mother again as we get closer to Mother's Day, that all it takes is an amazing Le Rêve from Domaine Carneros to just get her to recognize, that Northern California agriculture is really, it's been kissed by, Mother Nature.
In terms of flavor, I know if you have oysters, you can usually say that, East Coast oysters taste this way, they're more minerally, and West Coast oysters are more succulent. Is there some sort of flavor signifier for California caviar?
Absolutely. And that, I think, is the best way of kind of guiding people to what your palate should expect. It's like a freshly salted farm butter flavor.
Oh, that
So,
sounds good.
and it's one of the things that, is both a benefit and a knock on white sturgeon, specifically Western produced white sturgeon, is that it's a single note caviar. You might not run into as much complexity or diversity of flavor. And that's actually somewhat by design. So, one of the efforts done in the early days was tasting out the different sort of flavors that these different brood stocks were producing from a farming perspective, so that we could hone in on the flavor that we felt reigned supreme, which was this freshly salted farm butter flavor, rich, fatty, unctuous, almost like a toro to the sushi, like sashimi or nigiri fan. Just that unctuous fattiness that just has a little bit of salted kiss of the sea. By not being overly nutty, by not being super briny, by not being, let's say, herbaceous, it allowed the person who loves white sturgeon to really always look for close your eyes, enjoy a scoop of it, and just let the rich, fatty, salted flavors sort of remind you of why you put all this effort into seeking out products that we farm or that are farmed by our neighbors. So that single note of freshly salted farm butter is very much unique to white sturgeon. And of all the other varietals, none of them will have that depth of rich salted butter flavor that white sturgeon is able to produce. And that becomes our signature note.
That sounds amazing. I'm getting hungry just talking about this. Can we pull back and talk a little more broadly for a moment? I mean, can you explain what makes for good caviar? I mean, does it have to be expensive? Does it have to be considered a luxury item?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, kind of speaking to not only what makes a good caviar, but, why is caviar expensive? I'll kind of give a little background to. So, in the case of our farms and most farms that produce sturgeon, only the females produce caviar. The males are used at our farm for broodstock purposes, but also they do our smoked fish program for our smoked sturgeons and smoked sturgeon pâtés. The females, on the other hand, are raised anywhere from 6 to 8 years, a minimum of 6 years to reach maturity to produce caviar. And again, the caviar is the unfertilized, salted roe of the female sturgeon that has been cold aged and rotated biweekly in a curing vault for anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks to allow the salt through kind of gravity and osmosis to make its way from the outside to the dead center of the beads to kind of release that full flavor. So that's kind of the background to why is caviar not a inexpensive luxury food bite, is really the resources that go into raising the fish and producing this 2 ingredient sturgeon roe and salt inspired item.
Is it ever consumed unsalted?
So that's a good question. So when we do our initial work, we do try it kind of raw to make sure that, let's say, the class of fish that we're going to produce are mature enough, that they have the right richness and flavor. The answer to your question is the raw caviar will have a muted version of that final flavor. So it takes really the best of the best within our team to be able to pick up on, hey, I taste the rich fattiness, or it has like some of the aspects that will play into texture, or it has the right color or eye appeal to it. It's not too briny. It's not, there's no earthiness. It's a very clean flavor. So all of that, the salt really is going to be almost like the catalyst to release all of the full flavor of it. It's really just a leg of ham until it gets salted and becomes, jamon or prosciutto, and through that aging and curing is really what releases that dynamic of flavor. But no, when it's raw, we'll have a sense of, hey, where this will be headed.
Interesting. I just assumed it was for preservation purposes. That's so interesting.
So in its inception, yeah, absolutely. Caviar is another one of those, how would I say it, that necessity is the mother of innovation. They were forced to, specifically in the case of some countries like Iran, the South Caspian, where Ramsar is one of these small sort of coastal towns that was known to have docks just kind of in the middle of the Caspian that would produce caviar. And they, at that time, would really just remove the roe from the fish and they were having trouble getting all the way from Ramsar to some of the capitals like Tehran. And so the only way to get it there was through salt. So the salt worked to preserve it as a historical preserving method, hundreds of years ago. And that actually led to releasing the full flavor. And the people who brought it in realized, wow, this is far superior in its flavor than when we left. And now salt is obviously a preserving method, but the goals of the farms, like for us, is the less salt, the better. So we want people to experience as much caviar as possible. So a lot of times you'll find a historical word, which ironically is a Russian word called malosol, which translates into meaning little salt. And really what that meant back in the day was this is a very perishable, very premium caviar with very low salt. Now, as a luxury bite, what makes caviar luxurious? I think there's a couple components that go into it. I think it has like kind of its historical, kind of sought after. This is what the Shahs and the Tsars were battling over. It was a prestigious item. But like fans of oysters, or, again, I go back to, fans of sushi, or even enthusiasts of delicious wines, it's all about the flavor. So if you like an oyster, again, I'm obviously biased as a sturgeon farmer. What makes an oyster decadent and delicious is simply magnified with caviar. There's just more of it in terms of that kiss of the sea, the rich fatty flavors, just those notes that really are unique to something that is coming from the sea, where it's just uber clean, and again, just rich, fatty, like a protein that shouldn't be a sea-based protein. And that's why I often throw out like a toro or a tuna belly or even a salmon belly for that matter. It's just a wonderful combination of good for you, great tasting, and inspired in its farming practices to produce. It just takes a long time. And I think that's why caviar is expensive. We have some grades that in our mind are not, overly expensive, like our classic white sturgeon grades. These are some of our quicker to produce fish, maybe right at that 6-year mark, or, not in the 7-year, 8-year, where you deal with some of our reserve grades or crown jewels, and where you start getting these sort of, again, to use an analogy, and this time with spirits, like moving from an añejo to an extra aged añejo. Caviar can get very expensive because you are producing fish where half of your spawns turn out to be males. Only 50% of them are females. Of that 50%, you're waiting anywhere from 6 to 8 years to produce the actual caviar. In that process, you'll identify which grade it qualifies as. And that's, again, like a wine producer knowing that everything in his vintage isn't going to be, a 100 score, $100 bottle. That there's some stuff that you're going to produce that will be those $20, $40 bottles that are amazing and are kind of gateways to the enthusiasts on the product. And that's really how we look at our grades here at Tsar Nicoulai, is our classic and estates are really there to allow you to experience California-inspired white sturgeon caviar and hopefully guide you to look above that. And at the end of the day, if our original estate grade turns out to be someone's favorite, there's nothing wrong with that. The better our consumer, identifies what it is with our caviar that they love, the happier everybody is. Because that's really what this whole conversation is about. A lot of these food and beverage podcasts are really helping people get more educated and figure out what they love and the why behind it. I think once you can connect those dots, you become more tolerant of the fact that this amino acid, omega-3, ancient food bite that is now grown under California sunshine is, it's good for you, but it is a bit pricey. So that's the negative on our superfood, is that we're not a cheap superfood. But we hope that for the seafood enthusiast, we bring so much dynamic flavor that's really our differentiator. Is there is no substitute for caviar. It really is a flavor that is so unique to itself that there's components of caviar's flavor and other delicious things from the sea, scallops, oysters. But they're just heightened when it comes to caviar. Now, obviously, I'm a sturgeon farmer, and I'm a child who grew up eating caviar under my mom's watch, so I'm very biased. But for seafood lovers, for sushi lovers, man, oh man, get your favorite California sparkling, highly recommend, get a Loreb, put that bottle on ice, grab our reserve or our estate, and it's a heavenly pairing.
I've this vision of you as a little kid. Instead of having tuna fish sandwiches, you had caviar sandwiches.
Absolutely. And it was
Oh, I was kidding.
butter, caviar, and some sort of unique sort of rustic bread. And that's how my mom got me into it. And I have 2 kids now, and I have one kid, my 4-year-old son, absolutely loves caviar. My daughter, she loves the bread with the butter that the caviar is served with. But she's like, you know what? You can hold the caviar. Serve it to my brother. So I think that's how these foodie love affairs happen. Somebody has to kind of be your guide. That's, the hope of this podcast, that we get people. Again, it doesn't have to be Tsar Nicoulai, but if you're thinking caviar, give Northern California a chance. I think that hyper-local, delicious, rich, fatty flavor, man, it's almost bold enough to stand up to, something like, I love California cabs, Napa Valley cabs, just sing to my soul. So, our product is almost rich enough to make its way there. While we're better suited for California sparkling, that crisp sort of effervescence will clean your palate and re-engage you for many more bites of our caviar. There's so much good wine that comes out of the United States. I think there's a perfect pairing meant to happen, whether it's a still, a sparkling, a white, a red. There's very, very enthusiastic ways to pair obviously I would say within the state of California, but I think the United States is an amazing place, and there's more growing regions than, just our Northern California one.
Okay, so I'm just about winding down here, but I did want to ask one more question. So, according to your website, your team sings to the sturgeon. Is that true?
It is, and I think they sing for their own mental health as well. And we have some talented people, which backgrounds that maybe had to be in theater or some other aspects of their education through their high school and college. So I think what that does is it sort of creates this really, we like to refer to it as a California chill, relaxed environment. It's a slow food. Our staff has been at our farm. In many cases, the average staff members work 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Life cycle of each vintage is about 6 years. So I think you need to create an environment that does 2 things. We have a very eco-friendly, and again, I'll use our eco certification, like our efforts of going green are kind of that intersection of being sustainable for the environment to the point where it can help you become more sustainable as a business. And that's really the goal to what we do in Northern California. We have to be, because of resource restrictions, the cost of operating a farm, the cost of land, we have to be sort of on the plus side of agriculture technology. But also, like, we like to think of it as kind of, we have some like fair trade ethos in our mission, where it's that equal stewardship. Your employees that work this long for your vintages are part of your sturgeon family, and you want them to feel at home at the farm. And the beauty of the farm, the care for the farm, the clean nature of the farm is what encourages everybody. And really, a lot of that is what fuels into the award-winning caviar. It's all about the team. And that team includes our, beloved native California white sturgeon. So
I love they're part of the team. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about sturgeon and caviar. And parents, you heard it here first. Feed your children caviar sandwiches. So thank you so much for your time, Alan. It's been really interesting.
It's been a pleasure for me as well.
Thank you, Alan.
It may have taken decades for people to learn that excellent caviar can be grown right here in the US, but now the secret is out, and caviar is everywhere. But it kind of sounds like we should definitely be checking out caviar produced in Northern California. What are your thoughts? If you liked today's episode, we'd love to read your reviews and hear what you think. And hey, why not tell your wine-loving friends to check us out too? Remember, you could subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. You can also go to winemag.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm JC Tops. Thanks for listening.